Hello everyone, I'm hoping we're going to have some people joining in a minute, so just come in, make yourselves at home. I'm going to invite our collaborators whilst we're doing that. Lovely. Hello, hello. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Everything's fine?
I think so. I've invited Isaias to join us any second,
All right.
really.
Perfect. Perfect. Can you hear like the cuckoo clock in the back?
A little bit. Is it just because it's the hour?
Yeah.
That's all right. Hello, we have a couple joining now.
Yeah.
I've just tried to invite them again. Oh, hello. I can see you in the chat. Here we go. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, very foggy morning here in Los Angeles. They're sort of like London weather.
But I hope like you're doing okay and that you're pumped up for the live stream.
No, absolutely. I'm excited.
Perfect. Should we give it like a minute or should we start, Emily?
I think we
I
should
think it'd be
start since everyone's here.
great. Cool.
Yeah.
Minority
Also,
attention.
Emily, I think there's times when we can't hear you, but if that happens, I'll jump in. Don't worry. I've got everything in front of me.
Thanks so much.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Mahnur Kamran. I'm a 20-year-old climate justice activist, and I'm joined by Emily today, who's going to co-host this live stream. Emily also has like a lot of experience within climate action.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm been a climate activist for the past 5 years. We're here with Teach the Parent today, and Teach the Parent is a new campaign where you as young people can help to drive sustainable action. We found that we're really frustrated with the lack of climate action from our leaders, so we're driving action instead by talking to our parents, carers and guardians, and helping them and asking them to help us. Okay? So it's all about how the small chats have a really big influence, and we're hosting monthly live on the themes that you said were important to you, each time with a different expert. So every month we'll give you some really easy to follow actions that you can go and take away. And you can join our website, which is teachtheparent.org.
All right, perfect. So this month was filled with a lot of like youth-led events. So we had International Youth Day on the 12th of August. So this like live stream's theme is youth activism, as you all know. So I thought like this would be the perfect month to host this, just because there's a lot going on internationally within this month on young people. And I'm delighted to announce that we have Isaias Hernandez joining us today. Isaias is a well-known environmental educator, activist, creative, and founder of Queer Brown Vegan, a media platform aimed at delivering intersectional environmental education.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. As I obviously doesn't do justice to the work that you do. So we'd love if you can introduce yourself a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for having me. And my dog is joining my live stream today just because he's very, needy on that end. But I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name is Isaias. I do a lot of environmental media work through literacy, writing, and editorial. So I'm very excited just to join you all to learn more, but also to kind of share more of my experiences with environmentalism. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure, our pleasure. So like, let's get into the live streams. The first question is like a really easy one. Obviously, the aim of the campaign is to engage young people with with climate action within their domestic settings. And I know you also have a lot of experience in youth climate activism. So the first question really is, what got you into climate activism? Was there something that happened during your childhood, or was it just like a random interest? Yeah, I would love to know more about like what got you into what you're doing now.
Yeah, so into relation to climate activism, I think, growing up in Los Angeles, I grew up in extreme poverty. And so for me, my experiences understanding the environment was a bit complex and unique. So a lot of the times I remember growing up just watching shows on like Nat Geo and like Discovery Channel, and you would see like, famous conservationists like David Attenborough, Jane Goodall, and other biologists and other scientists in the fields that were traveling around the world to save the planet that's in crisis. And so I always kind of saw the standard of environmentalism through that lens of experts who are on TV, experts who have studied the science, and these are the true environmentalists. And so I think that when I was growing up, I just didn't realize that, one, like my environment was poisoned, but two, like I had accepted the conditions that I was living in, and that was my truth. And so like I think it was years later when I started to kind of question more about like the policies and practices that go into place for low-income communities and why these communities don't have enough access to resources. I think that really sparked my curiosity to learn about the environment. But I would say that, when it came to being a kid, like in my younger years and teenager years, like I honestly was very confused of what career I really wanted to do. And so I think for me, I think the reason why I chose environmental science was because it just seemed like very accessible for me, and it also seemed very like what I would say like an introductory for me to understand different systems. And so I think I approached environmentalism through a curiosity lens. But I think in college, when I got more involved in activism through college organizing, I kind of realized that I felt so uncomfortable claiming the title climate activism and activist, because I was always someone that grew up being like, you don't want to center yourself, to put yourself in the back, let others do that, support as much as you can, but never speak, never put yourself on the podium, never do any of those things. So I honestly never really did any of that. But what made sense as a climate activist was education, and was really being there for people, because I really felt that literacy and media and education were literally large influences that got me started in this industry. And so I feel like for me, I've never wanted to make anyone feel like they're not good enough or they don't fit the labels, and to really empower them through their stories. And so I think that's really how I got more involved in climate. So I would say that I had the privilege to study both the environmental science, the scientific side, but also doing grassroots work too was very important for me to help shape my understanding of really approaching environmentalism with a more holistic lens.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I was just curious to know if the grassroots work that you were doing started at like university, or was it before that?
Yeah, sorry, you cut off a little bit, but yes, I got the question. In high school, so I did a lot of environmental justice organizing. So I did a lot of language translation. And so for me, I never really saw surveying people or going to people's doors as activism or organizing. I just thought it was like, oh, you're trying to help the community. So I didn't really see it through that lens of like, this is organized, this is activism. I just said, I'm just being told what to do. And so I think language translation to me is a very important thing, specifically where I grew up. Like, it's majority of Spanish speakers. So like, I think for me, it was really important to not just connect with the community, but also understanding like a lot of environmental justice organizations in the United States like don't have a lot of funding and resources. So when I came into this college organizing route, like these not larger conglomerate, but larger organizations that have more infrastructure and resources, it was a bit hard for me to connect with them. One, because they didn't come from backgrounds like me. Two, some of the activists came from very affluent, privileged backgrounds, and I think there was a lack of understanding and acknowledgement of those spaces. And three, it was just the fact that it's mainly youth. So like, where were the elders? Where were the older people to tell us and to guide us if we were doing the right things or not? And so I think I really struggled in college because there was a lot of absolute mindsets of like having to self-sacrifice your mental health for the greater good of the collective. But I really felt a bit disengage with that narrative. Even though I was still doing those things, I felt like it was never enough for people. And that's when I realized like I'm setting myself up for failure and burnout, because once your health is gone, no one is there for you.
No, for sure. And I think what your point about the privilege and like all of that, I think Emily and I can relate to a lot of the points that you're talking about, even from like the UK stance. I think we were just talking about this today. So thank you so much for sharing that. Emily, would you like to take the next question?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So obviously the aim of our campaign is to get parents involved, engaged with the climate crisis. So you have spoken to your parents at any point about your activism, or how did you do that and what were their reactions?
Yeah, so I think I'll give twofold. One is parents that message me for advice, and the other ones are my own parents. So I think my own parents are just very like traditional. So they're like brown. They're like, do not get arrested. This will be on your criminal record for the rest of your life. It'll follow you. And obviously in the United States, we see how a lot of Black and brown communities are criminalized by the justice system here. And so I think for me, it was always, I think when I told them what I was doing, they were just like, well, if you were in the global south, it'd be very dangerous for you, because my parents are from Mexico themselves, and participated a lot in activism during their years. But I think that when it comes to parents engaging to me about their kids, I think that is it's very tricky, because I think on one hand the parent is wanting to make sure that their kid has a prosperous life. But on the other hand, they're also very worried about the ways that police systems in the United States are being shaped. So I think they ask me, like, what are ways effectively to both do it, whether their kid has a chronic illness or disability and may not be able to show up for protests in real life, or whether that's through digital activism. I think that like a lot of them really, I think really a lot of them are just curious to say, not what are the safest ways, but what are ways in which my child can also feel empowered through this without harboring anger that's unsustainable for their health. And I think that's something where, as parents, I even call myself a dog parent here, like we have to be able to like provide the next generation of young people resources and tools of how to manage and balance this type of anxieties, crises that we face. Because I remember being in college activism, and all of my peers were all burnt out, and we were all pointing fingers at each other, and that's not really a healthy nor sustainable movement. So we had to really look and understand, like, how do we create mentorship programs? How do we understand that parents like are part of this conversation, and that even if they're not participating in those actions, are you driving your kids to those protests? Are you providing them with food? Like, I feel that like a lot of the times as a brown person, that my parents were a little bit traditional and a little bit disconnected. I couldn't really tell them what I was doing, or like tell them exactly, because I think that would cause more anxiety. So I think it was hard for me to not tell them, but also it was safer for my mental health not to tell them, because I think they would be being put in a very dire mental health situations themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we often talk about the accessibility of activism and linked it to parents, because obviously, well, sometimes at least, parents don't have concerns specifically about the activism, but it's about the safeguarding side of things. So I guess just making things work legit is a really good point. I'm just going to jump in and say to people who are joining us and watching, feel free to drop any questions in the comment box, and I'll have a little look, because we should have some time for some extra ones at the end. Yeah, I'll hand it back over to you, Manal.
Yeah. So thank you so much for the points that you made. We're just gonna jump into more of like the campaigning side now, and I just wanted to ask you, like, youth activism, like what is it about young people and the topics that they're choosing to engage with, or the action that they're carrying out, that is different from the status quo?
Yeah, definitely. Is this a question for me, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, sorry. It lags a little bit, so I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know if you're still talking or not.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Yeah. So sorry about that. Anyways, yeah, like I think like some of the things with like climate youth activism that's really against the status quo is that I think climate youth activism is very diverse these days. I think it's really changed over the last few decades. If you look back in the United States, for example, one of the first movements in the 1960s or 70s with the first Earth Day movement, it was found that like predominantly it was upper class, white students that were fighting for conservation efforts, which isn't really like a bad thing, right, for conservation, but it really failed to illustrate the working class people who are also in rural or poverty areas, that are people of color, that are people with disabilities, other types of identities. And so I think today what the climate youth activism movement does really well that goes against the status quo is that I think that they're very much more strategic in the ways that they communicate, in the ways in which they engage in very diverse tactic of strategies. And I do think that more than ever before, large conglomerates of corporations are more afraid of youth, of like not wanting to have those types of conversations. And I really feel that like, here, for example, like there's a mother here from Florida tuning in, like, I feel that like, we've seen such negative media portrayal about Florida and Miami and all these things, and climate education at a risk of being threatened by other institutions and misinformation. But it all goes back to like the power of like how climate youth activists are also working with their parents to demand change, because parents have a direct pipeline or direct relationship to schools and institutions to make sure that their kids are going to be learning climate education. So I think that, when we think about going against the status quo, is that some of these largest tactics I've seen is like the engagement towards literacy, the engagement towards having events, the engagement towards having these mentorship programs, and that has prepared youth for such a long time, because we know that both in the United Kingdom and the United States, like education is being rapidly defunded or it's being disinvested from. And so we see this a lot in the US with the rise of public schools running out of resources around America.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I really like the fact that you touched upon like misinformation and also the way that young people like converse. I think a lot of youth activism happens on social media. Like we can talk about it like right now, the fact that we're on Instagram, doing this live stream. And I think with social media opens up a lot of, it could be either abuse or misinformation. So to you, what are like the biggest myths about you climate activism from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest myth about climate activists is that they're extremists. And in my view, I don't think that like, you know, engaging with politicians and pressuring them to answer questions in which they serve the people and they're supposed to uphold their duty isn't seen as aggressive. Because if the response from politicians are that the solution is to vote or to send an email to my office, that is extremely limiting. That's a PR response, and I feel like I don't fall for that anymore. And I feel that if you're going to be an elected official in any type of body of government, you need to be able to have uncomfortable questions asked to you. And if that's an uncertainty for you, then that's something that you must explore together with people. The second myth, I mean, I would say is that like environmentalists are insane, or like climate activists are insane. There's this like very negative portrayal of how people weaponize mental health issues towards like activists worldwide, that there's something mentally wrong with them, that they're not okay. And to be quite frank, activism is a sign of a moving progress towards a healthy society. And it's a cultural response to the stories that have often attempted to be abandoned or discarded in these narratives. So for me, it's really important to do that. And the last thing I would just say is that, the other myth is that, oh, it's only a young people thing. It's really untrue, because I think that climate activism today spans multi generations of grandparents to parents to siblings to cousins, aunts. Like, this is something that's very intergenerational today. And I think that anyone who is of older age can agree, whether you agree or not with the tactics they may use, is that you want a livable, healthy future for your kids, or if you don't have kids, for your loved ones that are coming. And that exactly is important to understand, because it's not just young people who are demanding this future, it's also older people. And of course, when we look at the media, it's more attractive to highlight someone who's young than someone who's older that's trying to do this.
No, 100%. Thank you so much for sharing that. I was like laughing with some of your points, not because I was making fun of you, but like the idea that young people or like youth activists are extremists, or they have like mental health issues. Like I'm just thinking about all like the interactions I've had, and I'm like, somebody gets it, somebody gets it. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Emily, would you like to take this next question?
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if you experience any specific barriers or people that you know any specific barriers to climate action, but do you have any tips on how we can make movements more inclusive to everyone, especially?
Yeah, you kind of cut off at the end. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sorry. How do we make climate movements more inclusive to everyone, especially the youth?
Yeah, I think in order to make movements accessible and inclusive, we have to think about the biases that we uphold. So like, looking at the current isms and phobias that exist in our spaces, from homophobia, transphobia, sexism, misogyny, like understanding like, all of these types of harmful behaviors that are exuded in our society. And even I am not excused from that type of behavior. And I think understanding like, how do we really decenter people who have often had the mic or the spotlight, and often recenter the narrative of those who often don't get those mics and don't get the spaces to talk about these things. The second thing is like to really make them inclusive is like really incorporating these people as leaders, because I feel that like when we don't have people who are not represented in the movements that are Black, Indigenous, people of color, people who are disabled, people who are queer and trans, people who are immunocompromised, people who are undocumented, like we have to bring these voices to the front line to understand like these are people that make these movements. And so if we're able to work with them to shape and carve what that looks like, then we are actually able to create a more healthier space. And I think that is sometimes the issue with a lot of movements, is that we really can't prevent clicks. They happen, and they're going to happen. And so I think for me, the best way to really decenter that is really creating spaces that really exude more joy, and obviously have the work element, but to have a balance of both, because I think it is really hard for people who may not know everything, and they feel like entering a space where they don't know anyone, and it can be very intimidating. So I think just making sure that the people are also not just diversity cards, but they're people who also implement the strategies. Because I do think that we struggle a lot in environmental spaces till this day, whether you look in activist spaces or corporate environmental spaces, there's a lot of issues still that are ongoing, and yet it's not really understood by people.
Thank you so much. Your point on like joy really reminded me of one of the other live streams you've done, which is also on this account. It's with Tori, and it's about eco-anxiety. So please do check that out. I think there's a lot of mirrors with what Isaias has just said, that Tori and Scarlett also talked about. So do check that out. So the next question I would like to ask you, and I think to be honest, it's a theme that we're gonna focus on, is you probably heard your fair share of young people are too inexperienced to do this work. And I think a lot of that comes again like online, and it comes from people that are more privileged, people that are older than us. So what do you say to these type of people? I think this question came up a lot when I was asking other people. I was like, what do you want me to ask? What do you want me to ask? And I think a lot of young people some struggle with this like confrontation, because it's like it's so unprovoked usually. Like they'll just come up to you and be like, yeah, but why are you here? Like you're only 19, you don't know what this is like, you don't know this lived experience. And I'm actually like, yeah, I moved like between 4 countries, I think I know myself. So like what would you say to the people that have this narrative that young people are too inexperienced?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to a lot of biases that older people have. And to be honest, as someone who is now more in the older phase of my life now, like, I feel that like in my younger years, when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, there is a lot of ageism of like, oh, young people are not that smart enough, that young people can't do these things, and that they don't understand the language around things. And while I think that as I've gotten older and I've, you know, after college I had to work in the corporate industry, like everyone has to get a job eventually, and you know, we all have jobs too. Like as students we had part-time jobs because everyone's like, you haven't worked. I'm like, no, I've been working since I was 13. Like my first job was in high school selling like chocolate and chips and soda to afford my first laptop. So like I honestly like feel that older people sometimes are not understanding the framing in which these young people are coming from. They're entering an economy that's destabilized, a planet that's overheating. They are entering limited resources to education, reproductive care, gender affirming care, like, you know, a safe, clean environment. And so already like this is like built up, not anger, but like sometimes like not resentment towards older people, but like lack of empathy that older people have. Because even myself, I will say that as a teenager I still felt that I could enjoy a normal teenager life. Like I was a teenager in the late 2000s, early 2010. So like I saw Lady Gaga. I got to see like all these other like I got to see like the weird phase of teenagers having that weird emo kid phase. Now I feel like teens don't get that because they go from like, you know, they're just evolving in different generations, which is cool to see. But like it's just like, to me, I feel that like older people have a lot of structural biases against young people because they have also fought in different ways to get to the positions that they're at, but they assume that young people are coming up to them and you know, trying to take away that power, when in reality we're trying to check them, to address them. And I think it's a constant conversation where I think there needs to be a more balance, that older adults need to step up and to provide more resources to young people and to mentor them, versus trying to antagonize them and say them like, oh, they only just wanted to attack me, and really reframe the question of like, are they actually attacking you, or are they asking you to address the power dynamics in this situation? And that is something that I have seen so much in the environmental movement, of older people trying to take advantage of young people when it comes to free labor, for example, doing these campaigns, or like, and I mean, I mean like other campaigns that exist, or like asking young people that they're being too divisive. And I think that's, we need to be able to hold nuance, but nuance that is actually really rooted in facts, data, science, and experiences, where I feel that older people are sometimes not wanting to have that conversation.
No, 100%, completely agree with you on that. I think it's also like the point about, you know, divisiveness, again, rings so many alarm bells in my mind, you know, when we're being critical of like a policy change, for example, and the people come up to us and they're like, no, but you have to accept this. And I'm like, why should I accept this? Like, I'm in the room to give you that different point of view. Why are you shutting me down? So I think, yeah, again, have to agree with what you've said. And so now on the topic of, you know, obviously trying to bring everything together, how can young people get involved? You know, I think that is probably the most popular question like I ever get. It's like, how do I get involved? I don't know where to start. I don't know if this is going to be okay with me. I don't know if I'm comfortable enough to do like interventions, which again, I'm not saying that you have to do that as a beginner. How would you like pitch like youth activism basically for young people in like the most non-corporate way possible? Like, what can young
Yeah.
people do to join, and what advice would you give to them once they join?
Yeah. I mean, I always say it's like it's like going into a new classroom. So like, you know, as you get older, you have different professors, teachers, like, you know, experiences of subjects, right? So like you're entering a new classroom. And for example, if I'm a student entering university, I have the ability to drop that class if it does not cater to my values. I mean, obviously there's specific requirements when you're in school that you have to take if you don't like the professor. But in this case, I tell young people like, it's your classroom, right? So you get to decide that where you want to learn. There's going to be certain classrooms that are so big that you feel so isolated that you don't feel like connected to the people, but you have the option to leave that classroom. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't make you horrible. You have the ability to find other classrooms that cater to specific subjects of field within the environment. For me, I think as a young person, like I'm really I've always worked a lot with Black and Brown communities. I've always felt safe around them. And so for me, I always felt this affinity loving working with environmental justice organizations because a lot of those people look like me, come from similar backgrounds as me, and I feel that I relate to them culturally as a person of color. And that's something that like I really keep sacred versus there's other spaces I'll walk in and I'll just be like, there's not even a single Latino, I'm out. I'm not going to be here because it's technically not it's not where I want to put. I'm old enough now to decide that this is not how I want to live because I know I can create whatever I want outside of the classroom. But I say for young people, like when you're young, you get to experience so many different things, and like that's the beauty of it. It's like you're not gonna stick with something for the rest of your years. I mean, like I remember when I started college, organizing freshman sophomore year of college, like I was in a big group, but I didn't really know anyone. Everyone was nice, but I just didn't feel connected. And then I found this group on campus. It was called Students of Color Environmental Collective. And it was just a bunch of people of color who come together and talk about their experiences in the program and then how do we help our communities internationally. And I felt like it was such a small group, but we were all close and we felt like a family. And to me, that was an example of like, wow, like this is something that I needed and it was free and it was not intimidating. And the people that looked like me did not make me feel like I was dumb or not good enough to be there. It was an open space for people to join. So I felt so privileged. And to this day, like that organization, like I mentor and like, you know, a lot of college students always reach out to me and they tell me that like, you know, like I've had influence in their journey. So I feel like it's about like remembering what legacy you want to leave behind. And for me, it was about joy and to really make sure that the next group of people who joined this club felt safe and they felt like they're smart enough to be in that.
Yeah, no, that's such a beautiful story. It's almost like as if you're playing the role of the elder, even though like you're still a young person. I'm not saying that
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
but yeah, it's almost like you're playing that intergenerational role, which is so interesting. And also something that, you know, ties back into our campaign. So like for the final question before we do the 10-minute Q&A, I want you guys to think of any questions you have. Please put them in the chat so we can have a look. So Isaiah, so for you, the last question is tying it back to the campaign. What do you think is the role of our parents and elders in supporting young people? And how do you advise young people to actually talk to their parents about this? Like, I think obviously we've given them all this knowledge in the past, 32 minutes. How do young people have that dialogue with their parents? Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I think what kids are, you know, whatever age you are, can have conversations with your parents is really starting off with not throwing facts and data and science to your parents, especially if they're anyone as a climate communicator myself, like me throwing facts and data and science isn't what got people interested in the environment. It was the storytelling. So I tell young people like you are all storytellers. And so the important thing is what keeps it more sustainable and holistic in our society is stories because they outlast the data and science. Not to say data and science are irrelevant. They're needed, of course. They're always and they're parts of stories too. But for parents and kids who maybe have different fields of interest, where your parent maybe is like, I'm a lawyer or I'm a doctor or like I'm a teacher, but I'm not like an environmentalist. I don't see myself really reconnecting the dots of like how do you make them feel seen as an environmentalist. And I think for a lot of the times I remember talking to my friends, like they would go on hikes with their parents to talk about climate change to their climate change denier parent. And then they like slowly got to understand their perspective that their parent was coming from. And then the parent got to understand where the kid was coming from. And I feel like there was this moral basis of really trying to find common ground. And I think that like, you know, for me, I always tend to also remind young people that like it's not about, you know, despair is is an attractive tool to allow people to feel gloom. But I say like don't, if you advocate for doom and not bloom, then like you lead yourself to burning out. Of course you can be realistic that our planetary crisis is not doing well, like that's a fact. But I think that like you also have the advantage with loved ones that are your parents to slowly introduce these conversations without saying I'm a climate activist, without saying do you believe in climate change? really understanding their relationships to the land. And I think for my parents, they always believed in climate change. But for me, I always like asking my parents about like, where did you grow up? How did you cook? How did you clean? What did you live in a house? Did you live? And like, when I started to unpack more of the narratives of my family members, the more I was like, they've always been environmentalists. They didn't really use that much plastic. And like, they grew up really poor, but also had resources to feed themselves, and like were very much more organic and local than what I'm eating today. So like, I think to me it's about also understanding their narrative, and that's what really builds a better relationship with, not just like through a climate lens, but through like a lens of love from your family. That's super important to keep yourself going.
Thank you so much for that. And also thank you so much for the anecdote. I think that is a common experience in a lot of immigrant households. Like whenever I go back to Pakistan, I'll find out like a different fact about a practice like that my grandmother used to have. And I'm like, isn't this like more sustainable? Like, why are we not doing this? And yeah, it all ends up making sense. But yeah, thank you so much for this 35-minute part of the live stream where it was basically interviewing you. I'll now hand it over to Emily if there are any questions, because I do have Studio 4 here, but I would like to answer any questions from the audience. So Emily, over to you.
Yeah, great. I mean, the comments have given an incredibly comprehensive account. We've not had many through. We've had one question. It's mainly just love, you know, it's informative, changed my perspective, and I feel more equipped to discuss the issue with my parents and elders. But someone asked, you know, you get involved with so many campaigns, you choose which ones to really get involved with, you know, with so much going on. How do you prioritize those?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think for any activists or people trying to do engaging in campaigns and activism is find ones that like are really meant for you. I think that like for myself, you know, internationally, there's always so many injustices happening. And I have to be very fair and transparent that like in the past I felt so much pressure to do it all. And I had to realize that like it's not sustainable for me to focus on things that I just don't have the relationship, but I have the duty to share the stories of activists who are sharing those petitions or those injustices. Like that's something that I can commit to. I think for me, I've always looked in campaigns of like the ethos and standards. So for me, environmental justice is really the main pillar of what campaigns I will always support and to talk about, specifically in the United States. And the reason why I focus more domestically in the U.S. is that this is where I grew up. This is my country. Technically, I guess I'm a visitor, but like, you know, but like for me, it's like I have a duty to show up for the Black and Brown communities here in environmental justice in the United States, because these are my people. And obviously, when it comes to like other campaigns, like in the UK, like of course I'll extend my solidarity in that end, because a lot of my friends, some people think I'm from the UK, but I'm not. I have an English accent. I always tell people, but like, you know, I think for me, like, you know, I feel that like, you know, like choosing campaigns means assessing your mental health levels and assessing the input and output that you can put into them, because I know so many people who will say yes to 5 campaigns and deliver 5% of that work, and it's completely bad, it's completely horrible. You let down of other organizers, and it's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the people you promised to work together. So I always say be transparent. I've had times where I'm going through a family crisis. I don't have time right now to help you work on your campaign. Like I have to focus on my family. And that's something that's very transparent, honest. And anyone who tries to shame you, to guilt you, to tell you you're not doing enough because you're not doing their campaign, that is a reflection of their limitation of how they see the world of themselves, not you. And I think I had to understand at a very young age that the people who attempted to tell me these things about these campaigns were the people less likely to show up when I've had a crisis, when I had a burnout, when I was going through a lot. The people who did show up were the people who never guilt tripped me of telling me I wasn't doing enough, and the people who told me radically and transparently that they'll always be there for me. There'll be things that we can disagree and agree on, but that they will show up for me. And I think it's about where you feel who will show up for you the most versus oh well, all my friends are in it, but I don't like the main person that's organizing this. So I always say just choose the right person that you want to be with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting that you live in the US and they think you have an English accent, and I live in the UK and they think I have an American one.
I
The parent.
honestly was like, you have an American accent. Sorry, I meant American accent, but when people look at my profile, they think I'm from the UK, and I'm like, no, I'm in America.
I love that. I love that. Listen, best of both worlds, dual citizenship. We love it. We love it. Something I've also wanted to ask you, and I ask a lot of like activists that are now very established, um, is obviously like you've been in the movement for a while now. You started like when you were in like what is it? What do you call it? Sophomore year of university or freshman year? Not too sure, but one of those. Um, so obviously like you've grown up in the space and now you work in it like full time. What do you think has changed in that time, and what about you has changed? Like have your opinions like within the movement changed at all like within this time period? Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, no, I love this question. I mean, I think that as I've gotten older, I felt that my younger, and I don't like to say like activists are like angry, but I would say that I did operate more in a binary worldview of like, this is how it is, this is how it's going to be. But then when I got out of college and got a job, um, one of the reality checks I got is like, that's not how work is done in the corporate world, unfortunately. And I didn't get an environmental job. I always tell people like my first job out of college was something else. It was in a different industry. I couldn't even get an environmental job. So I was like, well, that's, I guess my environmental degree and journey is over. But I would say that, you know, what I feel that has changed a lot with young people, and I will say this is a positive, is that their commitment to the planet is even more stronger, but their understanding towards literacy, theory of change is very strong. I mean, like the reason why I created Queer Brown Vegan in 2019 years ago was because I wanted to talk about these topics about what is environmental justice, what is climate justice, what is eco psychology, what is eco anxiety. Because I felt that when I was in college, I didn't really get to learn as much about those subjects, or I did, but I wanted to teach people out there of like, you don't need a university degree to learn this. Like, let me just teach you on Instagram. And I feel that younger generations today like tell me like when they start talking to me they're like, yeah, like and like all of these beautiful things that they say, and I'm just like, oh my god, like you are so ahead of the game or the curve than I was when I was like 18, 19, 20. Like I was still questioning how to talk about it because I didn't really have people to mainly always talk about these things or theories of change. In some cases, yes, but like, you know, I feel like younger people today have the mastery of that literacy and the theory of change. But I also feel that like, you know, my not that my opinions have changed, but I feel like I have more grace towards obviously like not towards younger people, but towards older people too, and understanding like some of where they're trying to come from, just because I understand like how difficult it is to navigate the world. While also, I think for me, like teaching the importance of financial literacy to young people, and I don't mean like get rich, just like, but to really, really ensure that you know, there needs to be some financial independence in your life to protect yourself, to make sure you have access to resources. Because here in America, I tell people, like, we pay for our health insurance. Like,
Mm.
it's almost 400 USD here a month for me. So, like, I am paying to live in America to take care of my health. So I always tell people, like, you know, when I was younger, I felt like I barely had any money, and I just said, well, I'm gonna make it like this. Like, I'll struggle, but I realized like that is also was very unhealthy of me and very like rooted in scarcity and survival, and it wasn't good for my mental health. And so I had to really always recognize with young people like always save money. Saving money is like gonna get you very far.
No, 100%. I think, like with young people, for example, I think, especially like on the topic of money, if somebody does, I think even in the activism space, if somebody does like talk about money, it becomes like a very controversial topic. And then we talk about like disposable income, everybody like then has an opinion, like, okay, why do you have a disposable income? Why do you need to make this much money? You should be working for free. And it's like, as you said, you have to pay for your health insurance, like I have to pay for university. Like I think it's not easy, and your point about being more graceful towards like the elder